everybody. We know this looks a little bit different than usual, a little bit of a surprise episode here. And it is different than usual because today, A, you might recognize Peter from our earlier episodes, and B, we're not actually recording a podcast. We are going to be recording a little mock interview. Peter is going to be our medical school applicant, and we're just going to go over some questions, some answers, ways to improve. So I will toss it on over to Kylie for the disclaimer.
I think we're side by side right now. That was fun. In any true Tachy Talks nature, there's always going to be a disclaimer. And there's two very important things today. None of these questions come from the interviews that we have done. They're questions that we've made up on our own. Actually, that Adveda made up on his own. Credit where credit is due. And then the other thing that we want to disclaim is that Peter is going to be our med student today, and he's going to be giving answers that are less than good. So he is a unpaid actor. So this is not his real interviewing skills. He is merely acting. And again, we're going to give feedback that's based on our own experiences. By no means does this guarantee that this is the exact right thing that you need to say in interviews. And of course, as per usual, it does not guarantee you an acceptance into any medical school in Canada or around the world. So with that, let's get started.
Right, so we just thought this would be a fun way to go over some more common mistakes that people make and just little things that you should watch out for, and we'll jump into it.
Yeah, just the format for this is going to be, we're going to ask a question, Peter's going to answer it, but unlike standard interviews, we're going to give feedback right away after the question. So I guess if you're kind of doing the interview with Peter, you might want to skip the feedback your first time watching and then go back later. But yeah, we'll give feedback after every question's completed. And Peter, are you ready?
I think I am. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being on. I guess we'll get started then. So Peter, can you tell me what an average day looks like in your life?
Yeah, for sure. This is a really good question. So on most days, I try to wake up as early as I can, about 5 a.m. or so. And then I always really want to get a really good workout in. I think this is really important for my mental health and my physical well-being. And then after that, depending on the day, I go to school, go to university. I go to my classes, depending on the day. Might spend anywhere kind of between 3 to 4 hours in class. Well, I guess before classes, I have breakfast. I try to really get a kind of good, nutritious breakfast in, get my food groups. I think that really helps me kind of mentally prepare for the day. And then depending on when my classes are done, I try to do some schoolwork after, maybe in the library. And then usually I have club meetings at night. So I'm on the executive of 3 different clubs. So there's the Cancer Awareness Society, the Habitat for Humanity, and the Student Research Club. And kind of depending on the day, I might be doing a lot of work for those, really trying to engage our membership and get some projects going. And then after that, I come home at night, and then usually by this time, it's probably like 9 or 10 before I get home. I try to catch up on some readings and make sure I'm up to date on my classes, do any assignments that need to be done. And then by the time I go to bed, it's usually kind of like midnight, 1 a.m. Then I go to bed so I can wake up the next day again for my 5 a.m. wake up.
Thanks for that answer, Peter. So I'll just jump in with some feedback here. The first point that I want to make is that when you're talking about a day in your life, it's important to be chronological. So you notice Peter is kind of jumping around, and that's an easy thing to do when you don't really have the structure already in your head. This is a pretty standard question. You should probably have a structure of what your day-to-day looks like ahead of time, just so that you can really walk them through step by step, big picture, of course, what you kind of do.
The next thing that I noticed about Peter's answer is something that I often see in myself a lot, and that is talking extremely fast and not breathing while he answers. So if you notice, Peter was talking a lot, saying lots of ums and ahs, wasn't really taking a breath to pause in his answer, which is something that I think a lot of students do. And one thing that was recommended to me as feedback for answering fast is if you're on a Mac, you can open up Photo Booth and you can record yourself giving answers. And you can see if you are talking too fast, saying lots of ums and ahs, if you're touching your hair a lot. Those are all common mistakes I think a lot of students make.
All right, and my last little bit of feedback I want to add is that honestly, we can probably tell Peter is an exceptional student from the way he answered that. Probably part of a lot of extracurriculars back when he was in undergrad, but you want to make sure that you want to be a little bit more personable in some of these interview questions. So don't be afraid to talk about any activities you do outside of school or activities you do in school. And the interviewers love that. It helps them connect with you. It helps everything be more personalized.
So moving on to our next question. Peter, tell me about a time when you acted as a leader.
Yeah, this is a great question. Thanks so much for asking it. I think there's a lot of chances in my life where I can become a leader. So to give an example, one of the clubs that I run, we sort of had this incident one time between our various club members, and they were basically arguing about when we should schedule an event. And kind of one of them wanted to do it the one weekend, and then the other group of people wanted to do it the other weekend because they thought people might be less busy with exams and stuff. And they were basically in this big kind of internal dispute in the club. So in that situation, I really tried to step up and act as a leader. So I basically took the two sides, kind of the heads of both sides there. I sat them down and I went through a conflict resolution with them. And I asked them, can you both explain the sides of your story to me? Can you tell me what the issues are? What do you think we can do to resolve them? And basically at the end, what ended up happening was that we came to a solution that the second weekend would be the better option. And I think what I learned from that was basically it's important as a leader to not necessarily tell people what to do, but it's more important to let them realize what they should do and kind of let people work with each other and communicate so they can find the best possible solution. And I think this is also kind of really important when you're a doctor, because there might be times where it's not best for you to make a decision. Maybe you should just let people talk things through and come to a decision that way.
Great. Peter had very nice structure in this answer to give some positive feedback. So he talked about a personal experience and then what he learned from it and then how it's going to connect with his life as a physician, which is really the structure that I would recommend for most questions. Of course, in an actual interview, you'd probably want to go into more detail about what you learned, about how that applies. We won't make you sit through all of that now, but there's some positive feedback, Peter. You had great structure for that answer.
I was gonna say, yeah, the one positive thing that, okay, not one of the positive things that Peter did was relating it to his career in medicine, which is something that was suggested to me when I was preparing for interviews. The one thing about Peter's answer, though, is it's very cookie cutter. It's an example that time and time again you will hear for conflict resolution. I sat the two parties down. I told the two parties to discuss. And the reason I can tell it's cookie cutter is because I said the exact same answer. And I wish I didn't. So you can make your answer a lot more personable and kind of try to infuse your own personality into how you would deal with these conflicts. And I think that will make you stand out a lot more in an interview.
Yeah, I think Peter did a lot better that second question than the first one. One thing you'll notice is that we asked about a specific CanMed's role, which was leadership. And Peter brought up other roles in his answer, which was communicating and collaborating. I think it's important for all of you guys to go on CanMed's website, look at all their roles and kind of have a story or think of a club or activity you did which fits all those criteria. So I think Peter did a really good job bringing in CanMeds to his answer, even though he didn't specifically say communicator or collaborator.
All right, next question, Peter. What is your greatest weakness?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think it's really important to kind of recognize flaws in yourself. And I think my biggest weakness would be that I work too hard. I've kind of been told this time and time again, from my parents, my friends. They always tell me I'm working and I'm, whether it's school or being involved in my extracurriculars or my volunteering. And they tell me that I'm just stretching myself too thin and not taking enough time for myself. This is something that gets brought up to me a lot. And I don't know if it's necessarily something I agree with. I don't think there is necessarily an issue with working too hard. And I think maybe part of the reasoning is that other people don't realize the importance and value of hard work. So in a sense, it's a weakness, but in a sense, it's also a weakness that I'm proud of. And I believe it's something that I don't necessarily need to overcome. And I think it'd be really helpful in a career in medicine because as a doctor, you're going to be working hard a lot. And if that's not something you kind of go into it expecting, then I don't think you're not really going to know what you're throwing yourself into, and you're not going to end up having a good experience as a doctor, and you're going to end up feeling kind of tired and burnt out pretty early on in your career.
Great, thank you, Peter. So with that answer, there is a big red flag for me here saying this student's going to be burnt out approximately 3 months into medical school, maybe a little longer. But you don't need to glamorize how hard the life of a doctor is. They know that it's hard. We all know that it's hard. And we all know that we need to cope with that. The other big thing that I see here is that people really like to take good qualities and say, that's my biggest flaw. It's actually secretly a great quality to have. It is okay to name an actual flaw. You're allowed to have flaws. And if you can talk about how you're growing and working on that and recognizing it, that is more impactful than doing a fake flaw.
Yeah, I agree with Haley. And the other thing is that if you're going to use one of those those good things disguised as a flaw, it's actually extremely overused. So many people will use the "I work too hard" example. And just to kind of reiterate what Haley said, is that Peter's answer didn't really show a weakness. He took a weakness and was like, actually, this is something that's really good, and I don't want to change this. That's not a weakness. So it's better, exactly what Haley said, to find a weakness and to really specify what you've done to overcome that weakness, and that will be super, super impactful. And again, exactly what Haley said. If you don't have balance in your life in medicine, then you are going to burn out so fast. It's important to balance your job. And a very good quote that someone very wise told me this morning is that you are a human first and a med student second. And that wise person was Haley.
I said that.
Yeah, I think Haley and Kylie pretty much said everything that was on my mind. There's two answers for this that absolutely trigger me. The first answer is saying I'm a very hard worker, because I don't see that as a negative, and they obviously talked about that already. The second answer is saying I'm a perfectionist. No, you're not. I don't think you guys understand what a perfectionist really is. When you say that, I'm going to roll my eyes. So please don't say that either. That being said, Kylie and Haley did bring up really good points. It's okay to actually bring up a flaw. Maybe you're a really hard worker because it's hard for you to delegate tasks to others. I think that's a solid weakness to say. Instead of saying I'm a hard worker, say that I have trouble giving other people tasks to do because I want to do it all myself. So just find different ways to say things, and really go through your activities and your experiences. And this is something you should think about before you enter your interview.
Also, notice how Peter said it's important to be able to recognize flaws in yourself. People recognize these flaws in me, and I disagree with them. So he really contradicted himself there. And that's something you want to avoid, because you just come off as very disingenuous.
All right, Peter, we'll move on to the next question. Med school can be really tough. How do you handle stress?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's something that I've had to deal with somewhat on and off. I tend not to get stressed out too easily, but when I do, I basically just end up pushing through, and that's kind of my go-to strategy. So for example, a couple weeks ago, between all my courses, I ended up having kind of 3 midterms as well as 4 assignments due at the same time. And when I felt really overwhelmed about this, I basically just ended up hunkering down. I forced myself to stay in the library. I studied nonstop, and I worked on all my assignments and studied for my midterms. And, some days I was in the library basically from when I wake up to when I go to bed, going to my classes in between, obviously. And, other days maybe I was getting home a little bit early, getting some sleep. But I think my go-to strategy is just pushing through it. And I really think this is the best strategy, because basically any other strategy, you're kind of just putting your problems to the side and not really dealing with them directly head on. And I think it's really important in a career in medicine to be able to deal with your problems head on instead of avoiding them or making excuses for yourself. So ultimately, I think that's my go-to strategy, and I think it's good for that reason.
Thank you for that answer, Peter. So I think a lot of people, when they give an answer like this, think, wow, the interviewers are going to think that I'm such a hard worker. But instead, they just think, wow, this person's trying really hard to impress me, and I'm not impressed. It's not impressive to ignore self-care. So if you don't have good stress management tools, now is a good time to get some. Pushing through is not a good idea, because again, I'm red flagging burnout here. Peter really is coming across to me as a student who's going to experience burnout. If this really is your way of dealing with stress, I'm not gonna say guarantee, I can't guarantee anything, but I can guarantee you that it's not going to last for all of medical school, all of residency, and the rest of your career. You really do need to develop good stress management techniques. So maybe this is your sign to look into like coloring or meditation.
With that, Peter doesn't actually answer the question. He doesn't answer how he handles stress. he just goes head on and ignores the stress, which is not really answering what they ask you. So there's a lot of other techniques that you can have to deal with your stress. But at the same time, don't lie. Don't start saying that you meditate when you do not meditate at all, because it comes off as disingenuous, and you can kind of tell when someone's just saying the answer to say the answer. So make sure that you're talking about your actual techniques for handling stress, and not just things that you think are the answer that the interviewers want to hear as well.
I'm just going to say, for all you know, your interviewer could be a mindfulness coach and could start asking you questions about mindfulness, and then you can't answer them, and then that looks bad. So yeah, don't lie.
I think Kylie and Haley pretty much got through most of the problems of that question. One thing Peter has been doing that I really like, though, is how he relates everything to being a physician. Now, his answer wasn't really good, but he's still bringing up the fact that if I was a physician, I would do this, which isn't a bad thing to bring up. And guys, handling stress doesn't have to be meditating and coloring and whatever like that. My stress handling is just playing video games, and you can bring that up as well. So everyone has their own coping mechanisms, and don't be afraid, because you never know if your interviewer connects with that. You might have something to talk about.
Okay, Peter, we're going to jump into a couple of situations here. I just want you to put yourself into the role of a physician and kind of answer them from that lens, okay? So the first one we have here is one of your patients presents with AIDS, and he doesn't want to tell his wife, and he doesn't want you to tell his wife. What do you do?
Oh boy, yeah, that's definitely a really tough question, and it's probably not an unrealistic thing for a doctor to have to encounter. I mean, people have AIDS; they have these other kind of sexually transmitted diseases that they can give to, their partners or other people, and you kind of have these situations where, somebody has one of these things, and they don't want you to tell someone else, but you kind of feel like maybe morally you have to. I think in this situation, like something like AIDS, which you can, it's a pretty bad disease. You should probably, I would probably explain to the patient, that why this is a problem with not telling his wife, and kind of explain that he could give it to his wife, or maybe he got it from his wife. I guess I would need more information to kind of figure this out. But I guess at the end of the day, sorry, there's just a lot to unpack here. I guess at the end of the day, it's really important that his wife finds out. And I don't know if me as a doctor, I can kind of legally go and tell her that. But I think what you should probably do is encourage the patient to tell his wife and point out all the reasons why she might need to know. Like, AIDS is I think it's a pretty bad diagnosis, and it might affect her for the rest of her life. So I think basically what I should do is just tell the patient why it's so important for him to tell his wife.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so the first thing that I have here is that ethics questions are hard. Two things to keep in mind. It's always okay to take time before you start answering to kind of formulate what you want to say in your head before jumping in. And that can save you from kind of the stumbling that we saw Peter doing, the geez, this is a lot to unpack. It is, but it's okay to say, I'm just going to take a second to think about this. And then you can come with a better thought out answer, more structure to it. And that is nice. The second thing to keep in mind is that they know you're not a physician yet. So you don't need to guess about like the details, the medical details of AIDS. You don't need to guess about the different things this patient is going to experience. You don't know, and they know that you don't know. So it's more important to kind of jump at this from a ethical lens, which I'll maybe let some of my partners talk about.
I'm gonna let Abby talk about the framework of ethics. But the one thing that I noticed, that of course, like, they know you're not a doctor, and they know that you probably don't know all the reporting standards. If you could show you preparedness by basically looking up what things a doctor has to report. That being said, I don't think they would expect you to know that. They're still teaching us those things right now about things that doctors are required to report. And sexually transmitted infections, like HIV, you are required to report that, and you do have to report it to public health, who will tell the partner. And so if you do know that, that's great. because that will show that you went that extra mile to prepare for the interview. The one thing that I want to comment on, though, is the language that Peter used. So some examples, he would say, oh, things like sexually transmitted infections, or instead of saying STIs, he would say things. Like, you could tell he kind of felt uncomfortable talking about it. When you have your career in medicine, you're going to have to talk about these uncomfortable situations. So you just need to say it. And the advice that they give to us is that if you're not uncomfortable, you're not going to make your patient uncomfortable. And when you're talking about things like birth control, pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, you just need to say it and not be uncomfortable. There was some other language he would kept repeating, oh, you know, I as an interviewer, I don't know. You need to tell me what I need to know. So that's something else you should give a bit more detail there. And another thing that Peter says is, oh, I think it's a bad diagnosis. And, you know, that can be kind of harmful when it comes to the patient if you're saying something to the patient, because HIV, there's been a lot of, we'll use HIV as an example. There's been a lot of groundbreaking research that's happened in HIV and a lot of treatment, and it is kind of stigmatizing language to those patients. So using inclusive language for all your patients, I think, is something that you can do in your interview, and it shows that you're prepared. It shows that you're going to be a really good physician one day.
Just a side note as well, and again, you would not be expected to know this, but maybe just something to keep in mind if this does come up during your interview. HIV can be transmitted through like needles as well, so it might be better to refer to it as a bloodborne pathogen. People don't just get it from having sex, so that is important because your patient might be an intravenous drug user, and it might be a sensitive topic that they don't want to tell their wife because everybody thinks that you get it from sex, so they must have cheated on their partner. There are those different facets to kind of explore. So again, not something that you would be expected to know, but just a hot tip from your pals at Tachy Talks.
All right. Once again, I think Kylie and Haley have killed it in terms of offering some feedback and comments. One thing I want to add is sort of the mannerisms that Peter has, and I recommend this to everyone that kind of moves a lot when they're in their chair, or uses their hands a lot to speak. Maybe you want to sit on your hands. Make sure you have good posture, you're up straight, and you're not leaning on your chair. That being said, for the actual answer itself, the content wasn't bad. What Peter was trying to do was say that it's important for him to tell his wife to talk about it, and that is important. Once again, I doubt they expect you to know all the reportable things for AIDS or HIV. But the big thing here is you still want to stress the fact that he should tell his wife. And if he doesn't tell his wife, you're going to have to relay that information somehow. The big thing here is looking at both sides of the argument. You want to get an understanding of why he doesn't want to tell his wife. And it's important to let him know that everything is confidential in a medical setting only unless it harms the patient or others. And that is something that interviewees need to know. You need to know that everything's going to be confidential unless it harms the patient or others. And in this case, there is a chance for it to harm others. So you would have to take a stance against this issue.
So next question for Peter. You are working in a hospital as a physician and suspect another physician to be under the influence at work. What do you do?
Yeah, that's definitely a really interesting situation. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that somebody who is under the influence shouldn't be treating patients. I hope most people would recognize that. There's definitely different routes you could take here, but I think the most important thing is to kind of stop what's going on right away. So basically, I would take that physician aside and tell him that he can't be drunk at work, and that's totally not okay, and that he's going to kill patients by doing that kind of stuff. And if he starts arguing with me, I wouldn't be afraid to argue back, because this is something that's totally not okay. He could literally have someone's life in their hands at that current moment. And then I would probably tell him that he needs to go home and, take himself out of the situation. If he's not immediately willing to do that, then I would definitely get someone in charge, like hospital administration or something involved, to kind of come down and tell them about what's going on and really just address this right away. This is definitely something that's not okay. And I can imagine that maybe as somebody who is drunk, he might get kind of mad at me and start arguing. And obviously that's not good for everyone around us either. But it's really not something that I would be afraid to do, because I think it's what needs to be done in the ultimate interest of patient safety in the end.
Thanks, Peter. So the first thing here is that what Peter said isn't wrong. He's right. It is not okay to be under the influence at work, and it is a matter of patient safety. But the thing that worries me as an interviewer is his approach. So I would say that the first step would be to get more information. So you suspect another physician to be under the influence. Is he actually under the influence? Maybe you should have a conversation with him first and kind of try to suss that out. And then it's also the aggression with which he approached the answer. So it was very much like, I'm going to tell him to do this, and I'll argue with him if he wants to argue. And then I'll go to hospital administration if he wants to do that. And of course, patient safety is your top priority as a physician, but it's also important to be diplomatic. This is a colleague you're talking to, possibly like a preceptor, somebody who is above you. So it's important to balance diplomacy with patient safety, which wasn't really expressed in Peter's answer.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Haley said, those are like some big accusations to start throwing around, that your preceptor or that your supervisor is under the influence. So you definitely need to find some more information. With that, one thing that I think that Peter did that was good, or he was trying to be good, is he's trying to empathize with the other side of the party. And he said he was trying to understand or maybe think about why the doctor was under the influence, or his physician or his preceptor or whatever. I mean, it did go a little off the rails from there, a little off track, but the idea was there, which is something that you should try to do in your ethics questions. Basically look at both sides of the issue and try to think about the problem at hand from their perspective. And that shows a lot of really good empathy. In terms of what you could do, I mean, as a med student, you know, I think that if it were me personally, I would try to find someone else I trusted in the department, or reach out to somebody else. I don't think that I don't know if this would be a place where I would want to get involved, but I would tell somebody, or I would try to help get another superior involved in the situation. But again, you do not want to be the one throwing around these accusations when they could be not right.
Yeah, the big thing here that I want to stress once again is that don't just assume he actually is under the influence at work. It could really be anything. Like, suppose he was just deprived of sleep because he was working so much last night. Now this becomes a completely different issue, right? So yeah, don't just assume that he's under the influence. Talk to him, like previously mentioned. One thing I really like is how Peter said he would take him aside and talk to him. You don't want to talk in front of the patients, because that's just going to cause a lot of distrust between the patients and the physicians. Imagine your patient hearing that, oh my God, are you okay? Being asked to your physician. Like, I would not want that. So yeah, whenever you're discussing something like this, always mention that you want to take them aside, take them into a closed out room, and talk to them about it. All right, Peter. I know everything's on Zoom nowadays, but just imagine you're writing an exam in person and you notice your friend cheating. What would you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that happens in undergrad. I mean, it's never happened to me directly, but I've definitely heard about people telling horror stories of people cheating off them on exams, or their friends cheating. I think at the end of the day, the main issue here is that this really isn't fair to anyone else in the class. You know, like I'm sitting here with everyone, we're all trying to do our best and get good marks, and then you have a person who's kind of, you know, taking the whole system and turning it upside down. So I think in this situation, I think what immediately needs to be done is I need to tell someone about it. If it's an exam, you know, tell a proctor and stuff. And hopefully they can deal with it the way it deserves to be dealt with, and, you know, give them a 0 and kick them out. Afterwards, you know, if it's my friend, you know, cheating off me directly, that's totally not okay. And I would basically confront them after and say, you know, this isn't fair. You're not, you're basically ruining my education, and my marks are going to suffer because of this. It's not my fault you didn't study. And I don't think I could see myself kind of being friends with this person after this. I hope also the school would come down on them hard and give them the consequences they deserve. And, you know, I would make it very clear and apparent that cheating is not something I believe in. It's not something I condone. It's not ethical. It's not something that should be part of anybody's life. And I would really be upset about the whole situation overall.
Thanks for that answer, Peter. So the big thing here that we kind of noticed in the last answer as well is that Peter is very aggressive. He takes a very aggressive stance. I hope the school comes down on them hard. I couldn't be friends with them anymore. They're ruining the whole system. Like, these are very extreme statements that are kind of a red flag. Like, of course, you want to get across that cheating is not good, but he's shown no empathy, no compassion, and that is worrisome. Not everything is black and white. And it's also a red flag to me that he's taking it so personally. Obviously, if somebody's cheating off of you, that's not great, but is it enough for you to turn around and say, I can never be friends with you because you've ruined everything? Like, that is a very extreme response. So while I have said before, you'll know that I've said this before in other episodes, is that I do think it's important to take a stance in ethical issues. It's not good to take an extreme stance, because that just shows that you don't really have the ability to consider the other side, or to like have empathy and compassion along with your stance, kind of.
And to add to what Haley said, which is my biggest advice, is that yes, you do need to take a stance, but you also need to show them how you got to that stance. So you need to explain. So we'll use this situation, for example. Not everything's black and white. I think it would have been good for Peter to say, okay, I'm going to go ask my friend and talk to them and see what's going on and try to figure out why they're cheating off me. Is it because they weren't prepared? Did something happen? Did a loved one pass away? Were they not feeling well? There is a lot of situations in life where we need to think about the other person and empathize from their point of view. And I think that if you went through this question and said, okay, this is how I would feel in this situation if I was being cheated off of, whereas this is where my friend's situation, I could imagine they're feeling, maybe they're feeling scared because of their exam. Maybe this is a really big exam. It's really important for their GPA. Maybe something happened in their family, and kind of looking at both sides. And then from there, after you've examined both of those points of view, you make your stance based on that. And again, exactly what Haley was saying. Maybe don't take such an extreme stance and start jumping to those conclusions, because if there's one thing that I've learned in the past year and a half in medicine, nothing is ever what it seems. So there's a lot of history taking and kind of teasing through situations that you can do in these ethics questions that also apply or will apply to your career in medicine.
Yeah, for a lot of these ethics questions, there are no right or wrong answers, as long as you back up your statement, pretty much like what Kylie said. If Peter said, I'm going to report this person, I'm fine with that answer. But then he still has to give information on why he would report this person, which he did. He said cheating should not be allowed. It's not fair for everyone. But you still need to see both sides of the argument, regardless, in all ethics questions, okay? Even if something seems wrong from a beginning, like imagine a question was, you see somebody stealing from a store, what would you do? Now, of course, stealing is bad, but you still have to look from the thief's perspective as well. That's what a lot of these interviewers are looking for, because that's what empathy is. You're trying to see from their viewpoint and see why they did the actions they did. So you can still say, I would report this person, but you still have to include in your answer that you're trying to understand why this person cheated, what led them to behaving like this. And once you start putting up those little pieces and finally give your answer, it's just going to be a much stronger answer, and it's going to be an answer the interviewers are looking for.
Great, so we'll move on to our final ethics question here. You believe another physician has made a mistake when prescribing their patient medication. What do you do?
Yeah, this is also definitely something that is probably pretty realistic and you might see happening. I think it's important to realize that not everybody's perfect and doctors are no exception. I do think something like this in this situation is really, it's not a judgment call that's bad. This is kind of a blatant error in prescribing patient medication. And something like this isn't okay and it shouldn't be tolerated. Things like this end up killing patients, and it's a very real thing that could happen. I think in this situation, if I do believe truly that the physician has made a mistake prescribing the medication, I would pull them aside and basically tell them, why I think they made a problem with the medication, what I think the problem is, and tell them that I don't think it's okay that they're basically putting patients' lives at risk with little mistakes like this. If it's something where the prescription's already been, sent to the pharmacy, we have to get a hold of them right away and make sure that the patients don't end up getting this medication and that they don't suffer. I think the next step from there would be to escalate this issue, because this isn't okay for the doctor to be doing. If it's a hospital setting, maybe I can talk to someone in charge of the hospital. Maybe I can report him to the licensing authority to, say that this doctor clearly doesn't know how to prescribe medications properly. Of course, I might try to educate him a bit, but you'd think that doctors would kind of know how to give medications, and I don't know what else I could do in that situation besides that.
Thanks, Peter. So again, here we're seeing a lot of Peter's extreme thinking, black and white thinking that you want to stay away from. But the other thing that I think really stood out about this answer was assumptions. And you can never make assumptions in ethics questions unless you're laying those assumptions out and saying, okay, this is the set of assumptions that I'm making. And that's fine to do. There may be questions, ethics questions, where you feel pieces of information are missing. And so you say, okay, I'm going to answer with the understanding that this doctor didn't write a different medication on purpose, that this was like a mistake, and that he doesn't realize it. And then you can answer with that understanding in mind. It's important to lay out those assumptions, but not just to kind of like jump there without any explanation, because the interviewers aren't in their head. They don't know what assumptions you're making. So it kind of seems like very out of the blue to me. And then, of course, we saw Peter escalating this all the way to the college, which is extreme. And also, he again contradicted himself. So he said, oh, well, all physicians make mistakes. I think that's important to recognize. But this physician obviously doesn't know what he's doing because he made one mistake. So now I'm going to tell the college. Those are two very different opinions, ideas, approaches. So you try not to contradict yourself. I keep wanting to say contraindicate. Try not to contraindicate yourself. Obviously, I've been doing too many modules.
Yeah, and along with being extreme, you know, you can take a different path to solve this, because yeah, this may happen in the real world, but I think that what you're doing here is you're making the assumption that the doctor did make a mistake, and which is something you should never do. Physicians have so much training. They went through medical school, they went through residency, now they're attendings. They know a lot, much more than you will as a medical student. And this is kind of making it seem like, oh, I know more than the doctor. They definitely made a mistake. And so something that you might be able to approach the situation is say, hey, doctor, I saw you prescribe medication X, Y, and Z. In school, I learned you prescribe ABC. Can you tell me why you did that? I'm trying to learn from this situation, and I want to know which drugs to prescribe in the future. And then in that situation, they'll tell you why they prescribed the drug. Or they'll be like, oh, wait, no, I'm supposed to prescribe this one. That's maybe how I would approach the situation in an interview. I would not start pulling them aside and yelling at them and telling them I'm going to the college, because there is, again, a lot of assumptions made there. And you could do the same thing here. You could look from both sides of the scenario. You could think, okay, like maybe this doctor made a mistake for some kind of other reason. This is what I'm thinking here. And you lay out, again, both sides of the situation before you come to a stance.
Yeah, I honestly have nothing to add. I think Kylie pretty much wrapped up everything I wanted to say right there. Yeah, just make sure you look at both sides and never full out assume something that isn't a fact, a stated fact. So, Peter, who has influenced your life the most and why?
Yeah, this is definitely a really great question. You know, there's been a lot of people in my life who have influenced me. People like my parents, my family, my friends. I think the person that probably influenced me most was my family doctor from when I was a kid. My family doctor, you know, I went and saw him when I was little for all my appointments and stuff. And I just thought what he was doing was the neatest thing ever. You know, I thought it was really cool to be able to take care of people. And, you know, you go into your office and they make you better. And that's really what motivated me to get into medicine, because I saw that, you know, my family doctor, he was trying to take good care of me and trying to help the people around him. And I think really at the end of the day, the reason I want to go into medicine is because I want to help people. And, you know, having a role model like my family doctor in my life was really useful. You know, now I go see him every couple of years when I have a problem or so. And I always look forward to those opportunities and, you know, getting to tell him that I'm applying to med school and that I want to be a doctor one day. And for that reason, I think that's probably the biggest influence in my life.
Everybody who goes into medicine wants to help people. It's fine. You don't have to say it. We all want to help people. And that's probably one of the most overused sentences. And it's all good. Anyways, also, Peter is providing a very idealistic image of a doctor here. Like, oh, you go in and they make you better and they're so great. And I'm kind of worried here that he doesn't really have an understanding of the challenges of the profession. And that to me is another red flag. So it's important that you as a medical school applicant understand that it's not rainbows and butterflies and curing kids and giving out stickers all the time. There's a lot of challenges that come with medicine that you will have to be able to cope with. And I just didn't really see that here.
Also, your role model doesn't have to be in medicine. Your whole life doesn't have to be medicine. You don't have to say that someone who influenced you was a doctor. I mean, I could say someone who influenced my life a lot would be my mom. And I think is a perfectly good answer if you can go through all the reasons why they influenced you. And honestly, it's a lot more impactful than saying my family doctor that I see every 2 years has been this immense role model in my life. Because honestly, that's not true. If you see them every few years, your family medicine appointments are really not that long if it's a typical relationship that you have with your family doctor. And there's a lot more people in your life who I am sure are more impactful than that person you have seen every 2 years now. So I think that is probably a better path to take than just trying to relate every single answer back to medicine or trying to relate everything to a physician in your life. Advi?
Yeah, absolutely what Kylie said. For this question, I think what the interviewers are looking for is a very personal answer. We don't really care about it being a physician, but honestly, if it is a physician, like that's not bad either. Because maybe the reason you are interested in medicine is because of some really important physician in your life or nurse in your life, something like that, who influenced who you are today. Don't let this really determine, or don't let like what we're saying distract you from what you want to say. Just have something to back it up and make sure it's a very personable thing. Honestly, like you can say LeBron James and it probably wouldn't be like wrong, as long as you can say why he influenced your life. Maybe watching him try so hard at basketball has really, spoken to you. That's what gets you to try so hard at university. Obviously, I'm just making a random example, but what I'm saying is that this answer is supposed to be different for everyone. And don't feel bad if your answer is a physician. Don't feel bad if your answer is not a physician or anything in between.
Okay. One last question before we jump into the next part. What do you expect to be doing 10 years from now, Peter?
10 years from now, yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question. It's something that I put a lot of thought into. So, assuming I get into medical school this year, so I'll basically be doing that for 4 years. And then my goal is to do a 5-year residency in emergency medicine. I think this is very exciting, something I could totally see myself doing, basically like saving lives every single day and doing all this hard work for people. So, by the time we're done that puts us at 9 years. I've looked into opportunities about doing like a master's during residency too. So I think that's something I'd also be really interested in. And then, by the time the 10th year rolls around, I hope to get a job, ideally in like a big city like Toronto or something where you can see the most trauma. And I think that'd be the most exciting thing to do. And I really think that if I continue to use my skills of hard work and perseverance and really putting myself first and making sure that I know my goals, that it's definitely achievable and something that I could end up doing. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Peter. Those sound like some really big plans. So I would stay away from stating that you want to do a specific specialty, just because the chances are you don't have an understanding, like a thorough understanding of everything that's out there. It's great to have ideas of what you want to do, and you might want to say something like, oh, I'm really interested in emergency medicine right now because I've had this exposure that has made me interested in emergency medicine. So that's something that I want to explore further during medical school, and perhaps it will be a career. And actually, Peter demonstrated that he didn't have an understanding of what emergency physicians do, because they don't just run from trauma to trauma every day. There's a lot more that goes into emergency medicine, and so that kind of made me skeptical of his answer right off the bat.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that everyone kind of goes into their med school interviews with an idea of what kind of doctor they want to be one day. Something that I think could have been a really impactful answer here is less about what specialty you want to go into and what kind of doctor you want to be. So you're going in and you can say, 10 years from now, I hope I'm a practicing attending. I hope I'm a compassionate doctor who puts their patients first, and kind of go along that path, because, that's something I think all of us hope that we can be one day, and something that we're all learning. If you do have an idea, when I went into my med school interviews, I thought that I wanted to be possibly a family physician. And, you could always say something like, right now I'm really interested in a lot of things. I think one day I might want to be some kind of generalist. I've looked into family medicine, emergency medicine, but I know med school is all about opportunities and exploring my interests. And I hope that these next 4 years will help guide me down the path that I'm supposed to be on. It's a little cheesy, but maybe you can make it a little less cheesy than that, but something along that line.
Yeah, kind of like what everyone already said, you really have no idea what specialty you want to do. Maybe you are interested in neurosurgery, you can bring that up. Like, hey, I am pretty interested in neurosurgery now, but I understand that I haven't explored every specialty, and I'd be willing to, grow and learn from everything. And maybe I'll find something else that I love. That being said, I think a lot of what this question is also trying to ask is for your own personal goals. Now, I know some people, once they get into med school or even before med school, their entire life is about medicine. I'm looking at you, Haley, but regardless, it's important to have your own personal goals. So maybe you can say, from 10 years from now, I am interested in possibly starting a family. I am interested in maybe getting married, having a kid. Or you could add some other goals, such as currently I like weightlifting a lot. I want to continue weightlifting for my health. I want to improve my record, things like that, right? It's not just all about medicine. Obviously, that's a big part of it. You want to talk about your medical career and your goals in that, but also bring up some personal goals that you also have.
Peter also said, I want to continue to put myself first. And then it just kind of made him come off like a jerk. Okay, so last thing, Peter, do you have any questions for us, the admissions committee?
Yeah, well, I guess I was wondering, as sort of like med students, doing these interviews, what did you do to get into med school? I'm just wondering and making sure I'm kind of on the right track here.
This is a bad place to ask that question. Hopefully you are on a track to go to medical school. You're here interviewing, like you've made it to that point at least. And also, like, I think that when you're asking questions, it should be more focused on the program and what the program can offer to you and what opportunities are available. And maybe you can ask about like, oh, does your class get together a lot and do things together? Because having a sense of community is very important to me, and I want to continue that through medical school. I personally, I think I mentioned this on the last episode, but I asked about like intramural sports opportunities because I really like being a part of a team, because I talk about rowing a lot. Is it a Tachy Talks episode if I don't mention rowing? No. But yes, I would stay away from questions that are like, am I doing this right? Am I on the right path? And also like asking, did I have a good interview? Like, they're not going to sit there and like, it'd be kind of awkward for them to be like, no, Peter, you sucked. Like, so just don't ask that.
Yeah, it's extremely important to go into every med school interview with questions for them afterwards. That is something that shows you're prepared for the interview. And if I could go back in time and change one thing about my interview, it would be ask better questions, because my questions sucked. I don't remember what I asked. I think I asked something about the curriculum changing because we were the first year of a new curriculum, but there was a lot more questions I could have asked. And I think some of the examples that Haley gave will show that you are very interested in the school. And something else, another trick that I've learned this past year and a half, is that you kind of want to give information that shows that you've looked into the school. So for example, you could say something like, on Western's website, I saw that there was the Hippocratic Council, which has a lot of opportunities for students and clubs. Is there an opportunity to start a club at Western? Which shows that you've looked into the school itself and shows that you know a little bit about their student life there, but also that you're asking a good question. So starting your question off, kind of giving that piece of information that you already know, that you've already looked into, shows that you're prepared and you've thought about these questions beforehand.
You can also just ask personal questions too. Like Peter asked, what did you guys do to get in? And maybe that's not the best question to ask, but what you could ask as an example is maybe something like, I know why I want to go to this university. What made you guys interested in being affiliated with this university? I think that's a really good question, because that gives the viewpoint of, there usually be a medical student at a panel, so they'll give the viewpoint of the medical student why they chose Western. They'll get a viewpoint of the physician on why they want to be associated with Western, and also like the community member. Obviously, each school has a different panel and the way they structure it, but it'll give you a broad range of what's so good about the school that you're applying to. Another thing is, sometimes at the end of the interview, they won't really ask you if you have any questions. Instead, they'll say, do you have anything else you want us to know about or anything else to tell us? And don't be afraid to just pretty much say anything that you think is relevant to the interview. If you want to add in a last line about why you think it'd be good for their program or university, feel free to add that in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think Haley might have been in a situation like this, but don't be afraid to say what else is on your mind that you think hasn't been discussed yet during the interview.
Yeah, I actually was. They asked me if I had anything else that I wanted to share, and I asked them if I could tell them a bit about how I came to the realization that I wanted to be a doctor. And I felt that that was one of my strongest points of the interview. So if there's something that you really want to highlight about yourself that hasn't been answered, I mean, I wouldn't be like, can I tell you about every award I've ever received? Like, that's not going to come across well. But if you have something meaningful that you want to share, it's totally okay to do that. And also another unrelated personal anecdote, Kylie, I think it's actually great that you asked about the new curriculum, because I didn't know there was a new curriculum until the first day of school. I didn't know.
I only asked one question though. My interview was extremely short. I was the first person to finish on my day, and that plagued my mind for a few months. So.
But anyways, we won't keep you wrapped up here with our banter. So we want to say thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time to do this with us. We think it will really help students. We want to reiterate, these were not Peter's actual answers. He's obviously here, so he crushed his interview. We all know it. And yes, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this.
Well, thank you so much for putting up with my answers, everyone.
Thank you, Peter. You might as well be our honorary podcast member at this point.
Honestly,
time.
I'll take it.
His acting skills were so good. So good.
Top notch.
But if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below or hit us up on Instagram. I'm not going to answer on Instagram, but Haley and Kylie will. And then they'll tell me what the question is, and then maybe I'll answer then. But yeah, feel free to honestly find us on anywhere. We're on Reddit, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. But yeah.
And where are we going to be very, very soon, Advi?
Oh my God. Apparently we're going to be on TikTok. Apparently. But I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Haley and I will be on TikTok. Advait might not be on TikTok.
He'll make a guest appearance. He's going to do a little dancey dance for us. Maybe Peter will show up on our TikTok.
Oh, I've been on TikTok before everyone else. So.
I know, Peter is.
Yeah, Peter has views.
Famous. But yeah, we hope this helped you out. We know you're going to crush your interviews. And one day when you guys all win awards, you can thank us in your acceptance speeches. So have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Bye.